But first, the phony election campaign ground on again today. More Labor spending commitments, this time $4.5 billion over the decade to New South Wales public schools. Now, naturally, there was a lengthy swipe at Peta Credlin, plus a false accusation that the Coalition had cut school funding in the 2014 budget.
In the first budget, there was $80 billion ripped out. $50 billion from health under Peta Credlin as the health minister, and $30 billion ripped out of schools funding in that first 2014 budget.
Now, again, that's a lie. Spending might not have increased as much as Labor's unfunded promises were, but it increased at all times. There was no cut. And besides, a better education system relies on good teachers, a good curriculum and higher standards as much as dollars to make it all happen. But put today's spending to one side, let's look at the aggregate, because I'm just staggered at how much money your Prime Minister has already shovelled out the door in this pre-campaign. Now, as I said at the end of last week, here are the numbers. Part of Labor's pre-election cash splash. Since early January, the Albanese government has already announced some $35 billion in new spending. Here's the list up there on the screen. Have a look at all of that. Every single day, he can't help himself. Billions and billions. Now, without a doubt, this is the most left-wing Prime Minister ever. No record to run on, no plan for a second term, but who's trying to put his own re-election bid on the nation's credit card. That and run a scare campaign against the opposition based on lies. Part of the PM's problem now is that nothing he says gets clean air, because it's constantly derailed by questions about the timing of the election. Here's what happened again today.
On that issue of the cyclone, keep on topic, will it have any effect on the election time?
We're governing, and that's what we're doing today. I know there's others are interested in election timing. What I'm interested in is getting things done on behalf of the country.
Now, if the election is delayed until May, the latest possible time he can hold the election, the government will have to go to a budget in a couple of weeks' time, on the 25th of March, and that will be a sea of red ink. Better to avoid that, as I've said for months, and keep up the pretence that Labor's got a good economic record based on two serendipitous surpluses, thanks to the coal and gas royalties that Green Labor wants to abolish. But calling it to avoid a budget is also telling.
If the Prime Minister doesn't have good news in the budget, which would seem to be the case, then he's likely to run to an election early, perhaps for April 12. And I think Australians would see that as a sign that the Prime Minister doesn't want to tell the Australian public the true dire picture of what the economic outlook is for our country.
The reality, of course, 7 successive quarters of a shrinking GDP per person, a household recession, a near 10% drop in living standards in terms of real disposable income, and a cost of living crisis that government policy has made worse, like the union-driven workplace changes that are killing productivity, like Labor's emissions obsession that, far from delivering the promised $275 cut to your power bills, has forced bills up by nearly $1,000 on average. Meanwhile, the Coalition was also out campaigning today, as well as an end to Labor's renewables-only energy policy, a 25% cut to immigration, access to their super for first home buyers, and flying just one flag. As Jane Hume announced on the show last night, if elected, the Liberals will end working from home for Canberra public servants. Now, in some federal departments, it's thought as much as 70% of staff are still not turning up to the office. Working from home? Well, I call it shirking from home. This latest move from Dutton's likely to get a few head nods in the real economy. Tradies, miners, factory hands, hospitality workers, people who stack the shelves, nurses, well, they can't pretend to be working at home online all day. As well, today there's been some talk the Prime Minister couldn't possibly call an election this weekend because of the looming storm disaster in Queensland. Now, take it from me, incumbents love disasters because it gives them a chance to look strong in a crisis and dispense practical help that oppositions can't. Plus, as we saw all the way through the pandemic, in a crisis, the media pivots to the government of the day and the opposition becomes all but irrelevant. Meaning that if there's a big weather event in Queensland and a subsequent big clean-up, I wouldn't put it past the PM to call the election this weekend, then a couple of days in, suspend the campaign, he'll call it a truce, which means he'd end up looking prime ministerial and the opposition are effectively grounded. Now, right now, Labor's struggling in the polls. The PM, we know, is unwelcome in a lot of electorates by colleagues who fear his unpopularity will drag them down. What Labor strategists are trying to do here is just survive the campaign, not win it, because they know Albanese can't win it, but he can survive it, and he might survive it. And by that I mean doing enough to prevent the coalition getting a majority in its own right. Now, to survive the campaign, Albanese's got to avoid his mistakes of last time. Labor's negative campaign against Dutton's got to hit the mark. He's got to get to the other side with enough seats to be able to cut a deal for minority government with the Greens and the Teal crossbenchers. And any time Albanese can stop Dutton landing a blow on his weakness as leader, his lack of record as PM, how much Australians are hurting on cost of living, is a good day for Labor. It's key to his survival. Hence the attraction of distractions for the incumbent. Events like a cyclone, where the PM shows up, stands there like the top dog, and next to the emergency workers, and Dutton is then effectively sidelined into irrelevance, because if he was to keep campaigning, commentators would accuse Dutton of not caring about those affected by the cyclone. Even better for Albanese is the fact that the cyclone is in Queensland, and that would put him front and centre in the media in a state where Labor's doing poorly. Now, yes, I know this all sounds Machiavellian and callous, but believe me, this is exactly what Labor is wargaming right now. And if anyone thinks they won't use the cyclone to their advantage, then they do not understand the Labor Party.